I'd like to welcome to the stage Shernon Osepa of the Internet Society, Bevil of the American Registry for Internet Numbers, and joining us remotely from St. Maarten, Sidney de Weever from the Bureau of Telecommunications and Posts in St. Maarten. Their presentation will be Disaster Recovery and Network Resilience.
Okay, so good afternoon to all. My name is Shernon Osepa. I'm the Manager of Regional Affairs for Internet Society for Latin America and the Caribbean. And together we have also my friend Bevil. He is the Outreach Manager for Aaron. And we do have also online Sidney the Weever, who is the Technical Manager for the regulator in St. Maarten. And we're going to talk about Caribbean disaster recovery and resilience. This is a very important topic. You may have seen, for example, last year we had in the Caribbean some challenges with respect to disaster. Maybe here in, thank God, in Barbados, this was not the case, but still in some other, let's say, Caribbean islands, we did experience some, let's say, tragedies, and it's very important for us to focus on this area as well. The main reason why we are talking about disaster and resilience and all these kind of topics, it's more with respect to access. Our main focus is to give people access to the internet. And whenever we're trying, if you just take a look, for example, in the Caribbean is very, very diverse. You may see, for example, let me take one extreme. If you look at Haiti, for example, 88% of the Haitian community is not connected to the internet. So they just have a penetration of 12%. If you look at Guyana, for example, 60% of the community is not connected. Barbados is well connected. It depends if you look at mobile or fixed. And then you can even talk about 100% penetration when it comes to mobile telephony. But that's not the case in all the Caribbean islands. But we are trying to promote, let's say, access to the internet, and nature doesn't always work in harmony with us. Because while we're trying to connect people, then we get all these natural disasters, and then we need to start all over again. So that is why it's very important for us to focus on how we can address the challenges that we are seeing in this regard. For example, our organization, Internet Society, last year we did a report to get a better understanding with respect to what happened in the Caribbean. And Jason, my good friend, you have always been at my side, so I would like to call you again. So let me just give me the next one, please. Yes. So we got some very important findings with respect to a report some research that we did in the Caribbean. And the first one was what we call inadequate coordination. Everybody was trying to do something, but we haven't seen one, let's say, one entity, one overarching, let's say, entity in the Caribbean trying to solve the challenges that we were facing. One other aspect that came out of this report was whenever you have a natural disaster, people are trying to help each other, but you need to do this in a more structural way. And especially when it comes to, let's say, fundraising, we didn't have a given structure to help those who needed it most. And here, again, we think we can improve and focus a bit on especially non-governmental organizations that can help us in that regard. And then also, of course, you have, let's say, the telecommunication infrastructure itself. We are talking about the internet, but without telecommunication infrastructure, be it wired, wireless, satellite communication, we cannot have internet neither. So we need to talk about the telecommunication infrastructure. That's very, very important. And of course, electricity. Nowadays, we talk about the internet, but if you don't have electricity, then you have the same problem. So we need to look at it in a more holistic way. Not only the internet infrastructure, but the telecoms, on which, let's say, which is the foundation for the internet, and also, let's say, electricity. Next, please. Next slide. Okay. So what is internet society? What have we been doing so far? What we have been doing is to, given that this is a very complex, let's say, problem, and internet society is focusing on promoting, as I did mention, among others, access, we cannot do everything by ourselves. We need to work with others. If you look at the internet itself, it is what it is due to collaboration. And this is the same model that we're using here as well. So we have been working with partners all around the globe to help us in that regard. If you look in the Caribbean, for example, we have been working and supporting Caribnoc. Also, Mr. Wooding is one of the co-founders of Caribnoc. We have been working with them in order for us to address the challenges. One other very important aspect is the founding part. So just give me the previous slide again. Yes. Within Internet Society, presently we are developing a so-called disaster relief fund. It's not crafted or done as yet. So we are still discussing it. We have some point of this departure, how we're going to deal with it, but it's not completely done. So I cannot share all details with you as yet because it's not completely done. But one of the things that we are trying to do is to focus on one particular, let's say, Caribbean island that we would like to use as a pilot, and then we can use, let's say, the experience gained on that particular island to replicate that on other, let's say, Caribbean islands should something happen. Something also very important, we engage with the local community. As you may know, we have the local chapters. In the case of Barbados, good friend there, Rodney Taylor, as the chair of the chapter. So we engage with local chapters. And what we are doing is, in this particular case, we have not only in the Caribbean and Latin America, but we do have chapters all around the globe. And we are working with chapters who went through these natural disasters. So people with, let's say, with experience. Telecoms engineers, people who have, let's say, experience on network development, deployment. In our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, we are working with people from Chile, for example, because they went through some of these natural disasters. We are working people from Mexico as well, because as you may know, they too went through these disasters. And coming a bit closer to us here, we are working with our colleagues in Haiti as well, because a few years ago, they too went through these natural disasters. So what we are doing, we do have a team right now, should something happen, and then we can always ask them for assistance to come to help us or to help others who are facing the same challenge that they went through a few years ago. So basically, that's what Internet Society is doing. Give me the next slide, please. Yes. As I did mention, this is not something that we can do by ourselves. We need to collaborate with others. We need to work with all our partners, with Caribnoc, with PCH, Erin, ICANN, LACNIC, Canto, CTU, Caribbean Telecommunications Union, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, all of them working in harmony for us to address this issue because it's a common problem in the region. So I would like to give now my good friend Sidney. Are you there? Sidney? Let me start first with Sidney the Weaver. Yes, good friend as well in St. Maarten. Sidney the Weaver is the technical manager for the regulator in St. Maarten. And last year they went through natural disaster as well, Hurricane Irma. And I think he's someone who can share with us the experiences that they had back then, and also what they are doing to get back to normal life. So, Sidney, please share with us your experience and especially what St. Maarten went through and what you guys are doing right now to get back on track. So, go ahead.
Okay, Shernon, thank you for that introduction. I'm trying to pull up my presentation, and for some reason it's not coming. Just give me 1 second. Okay. I don't think it's coming on the screen. Can you see it? Yes, hello?
No, we don't see your screen. Just share,
Okay, then
share the screen, please.
It's not allowing me to do that. Okay, here we go. Yes.
We are not seeing your screen, and we lost your face as well.
Oh, yeah? Wow. What's happening?
I think there's an icon share screen on the bottom.
Yeah, I got it.
Yes.
But you see it now?
No.
Oh.
Yes, I think yes.
Yes?
Yes. So just maximize it, and then I think we are. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon once again, everybody in the room. And Shernon, thank you for that introduction. As it relates to my topic at hand, it's the experience of St. Maarten as it relates to the passing of Irma and what happened to the telecommunications infrastructure on the island as a result thereof. A small brief introduction about St. Maarten itself. We are a small island, 37 square miles in its totality, divided between the front side and Dutch side. St. Maarten being the smallest part, 16 square miles of the 37. We have a population of roughly about 42,000 inhabitants on the Dutch side alone. And our languages are predominantly officially Dutch, and English is widely spoken. Bureau Telecom, where I work, we are regulators for the telecoms industry as well as the postal industry. We also obtained the responsibilities to regulate the utilities in 2017. Formerly in the Netherlands Antilles, we were a part of a bigger entity, which was the headquarters was in Curacao. And as of 10/10/10, so October 2010, we got our own independent regulatory body here for St. Maarten. Our main responsibilities. Preparation of policies, rules, and regulations as it pertains to telecommunications. Give advice to the minister and parliament, and so forth. What is very important, we are part of the emergency management group, and our position there is the head of the ESF2, which is the emergency support function for telecommunications, and that we are responsible for all things telecommunications in times of disaster. As we all know, we went through Hurricane Irma, as well as other islands in the Caribbean as well. It was a very powerful storm, sustained winds over 185 miles per hour. St. Maarten got pretty much a direct hit. And this was coincidentally 22 years, almost to the day of when we got hit by Hurricane Lewis, which was at that time what was the biggest or the most powerful hurricane in the Atlantic Basin, at least in that time. So we got Maarten was hit twice by two major hurricanes within 22 years. The aftermath, we had major devastation on Maarten, like I indicated. We had no communications immediately after the storm. No water, electricity for a couple of weeks. Plus minus 75% of the roofs were lost. Roads was inaccessible in certain areas. Large resorts was severely damaged and still are damaged up to the day. They're busy with reconstruction at the moment. Schools and government buildings was also destroyed because of this. Massive layoffs, which was to be expected. This is very important. 35 cell towers were destroyed, which equivals to about 52% of the total telecommunication infrastructure. Out of that 35, 13 were major. In terms of critical towers, were also compromised. So towers that had connections with other islands in terms of international capacity and so forth. And some of those towers also were covering very heavily populated areas on the island as well. Here you can see some pictures of some of the damages and some of the towers that were sustained through the hurricane. You can clearly see that a lot of the towers, the damages are pretty much the same in terms of what happened to them, in terms of failure. There was a lot of them failed at the most weakest point. One or two of them actually failed from their foundation, which was it was completely lifted out to the ground. Issues pertaining to telecom. Again, we had no communication in the immediate aftermath. 53% of the critical infrastructure was compromised. The largest mobile provider was out of business for almost a month, with about approximately 30,000 subscribers. Wireless internet services was not available immediately after the hurricane. Limited availability of fixed internet was also an issue. Most of the radio stations were down, including government radio station, and no TV broadcasts whatsoever. Trunking services, which is widely used by the police, ambulance, fire department, was limited. This is also due to a lot of the towers coming down where their equipment was housed. Rebuilding our nation. BTP executed a full network assessment right after the hurricane to be able to better understand what the damages were and as well what kind of aid would be needed to get the communications up and running, or at least in a very a rudimentary way. Just get basic information to the people and vice versa. BTP prepared a legislation to institute national roaming. This is something that we instituted at that time. Actually, now it's being worked out where it's going to be a compulsory measure whereby after assessment is done after a disaster, BTP would initiate national roaming or advise the Minister of Telecommunications to institute national roaming, whereby all mobile users, irrespective of what company they belong to, will be able to make phone calls or receive phone calls or messages or communicate in any case after a storm or a disaster has occurred, because barring the extent of damages that their own respective provider sustained. This is something that we are very focused on. Because it was noticed by us that, again, 53% of the infrastructure was damaged, and that's across the board. So our both big providers were the capacity was cut down by more than 50%, and the government needed to communicate with the people, and there was a lot of issues right after the hurricane with that. So we introduced this system, and it's going to be tested in a couple of weeks, if all goes well, to make sure that it is a permanent fixture. The other ones were provisions were made to allow government to communicate with via SMS. Again, once the national roaming was enacted, SMS broadcasts could have gone out to the public from one central point. Service providers were offered relief packages to the respective customers. They did that on their own. BTP coordinated telecom relief material in collaboration with regulators from Curaçao and the Netherlands. We asked them for sort of a wish list in terms of what they needed to get the systems at least basically up and running. And we contacted our partners in Curaçao, who helped us tremendously, with also our counterparts in the Netherlands to shop around and see what was available and what was what could be donated to the island in terms of communication. Those materials came on board the military ship, the Karel Dolman. I think it was like something like maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks after the initial hit of the hurricane. And there were towers, there were cables, there were antennas, and other telecommunication materials whereby the respective operators could have got up and running. BTP also collaborated with Vodafone, and this was something that was really a great asset to the island. Vodafone brought in 2 VSATs stations and several Wi-Fi hotspots to the island. One of the VSATs was actually geared for Red Cross and their relief effort, and the other one we were able to use it for the general public, whereby the general public with basic internet, they could have be able to WhatsApp with friends and family, and also the government could also communicate with them in terms of the relief effort and how where to meet for certain goods and what's happening, and also we had a situation whereby right 2 weeks after about 2 weeks after or a week and a half after Irma hit, Maria was on the way, and we had no way of communicating with the public in terms of to a state of readiness. And thankfully, Vodafone provided that service right after Irma hit, and the government was able to provide basic communication to the inhabitants in terms of the readiness for, actually there was another hurricane before that, was Jose, and then Maria. This is the Vodafone team with some colleagues when they came down to the island, doing their thing. Future plans. Electronic communications, disaster preparedness as it relates to alternative communication methods. This is something that we are very heavily invested in as it relates to satellite phones for some government departments, as well as VSAT for internet, whereby applications like WhatsApp and others can function and government could be able to communicate with its inhabitants and vice versa. Promote infrastructure sharing. Again, the national roaming is one. Also, the underground cabling and stuff like that can be shared with other telecoms providers, whereby more penetration can be had after a disaster has occurred. We're also, based on what we have seen with the towers and the collapse, we are starting a monitoring program as it relates to the maintenance schedules and logs and load factors of telecom towers, at least the new ones that are being built and the ones that survive, that we're looking at their maintenance record and their rehabilitation after the storm as well, to keep a close eye on that. But something we noticed too, that a lot of the towers, they were built for a certain class of a certain category of storm, but due to overload and due to poor maintenance, these towers failed, and creating a situation whereby people could not communicate, or entities could not communicate with each other after the storm had passed. Another thing we're looking at too is acquiring portable telecom infrastructure for emergency use only. We're looking at portable towers, or also known as COWs, whereby in the event that towers do come down and areas are not being served correctly, that these emergency towers, these cows can be put in place, whereby the infrastructure from the tower, what is salvageable, can go into this temporary infrastructure, and the community can be served that way as well. Another key point is providing key personnel within government on the use of emergency telecom equipment, such as satellite phones, mobile radio communication, and amateur radio communication. We have noticed too that some of these technologies, the average civil servant may not have the adequate knowledge in terms of the usage and how does it operate. So that's a program that we are also embarked on. If I'm not mistaken, at the end of the month, there's a massive training provided by Bureau of Telecommunications, as well as some of the vendors and the military to assist in the training of key personnel in this respect. And that's pretty much it for my presentation. As it relates to the VSATs and stuff like that, and in that type of satellite communication, is something that we are very, very actively looking into in the manner of communicating with our residents or having communication with the outside world as well in times of disaster. Another thing we are sort of getting into as well is the radio communications in terms of the broadcast, whereby we have also noticed that that although the broadcast on our island was affected, but there were other islands close by that it was not affected, like St. Kitts, for instance. They suffered very little damage, and their radio stations, the AM radio station, as well as some of the FM radio stations, were still up and running. That a program can be instituted whereby cooperation between governments, emergency services, whereby if one island is severely damaged in terms of communications, in this case broadcast, that messages can be sent to another island and have it rebroadcast back into that affected island via that means. And that's something that we are looking into as well as an alternative means of communication to the masses after a storm has occurred. And I would say that is pretty much my presentation and what we went through in terms of Burma and the results, the damages that we receive and how we are coping with it going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Sidney. Just stay online with us. We go into another short presentation by Bevil Wooding, and after that we will be giving the audience the opportunity to ask a few questions. So stay with us online for a while.
No problem.
So our next presenter, Mr. Bevil Wooding, and he will be highlighting more what can be done. We have seen what happened, and I mean, hurricanes are not going away. We can't expect them. We don't know when, but at least we need to protect ourselves. So he is going to elaborate a bit on that.
Thanks. Thank you, Shernon. Good afternoon, everyone. As Shernon said, my name is Bevil Wooding. I'm the Caribbean Outreach Liaison for the American Registry for Internet Numbers. I'm also a commissioner on the Caribbean Communications Resilience Commission that was set up specifically to look at could they go back to the map slide, please? Let's go back a couple. That was set up specifically to evaluate the region's response and the region's readiness for future climate-related episodes that could impact critical communications infrastructure. And Sidney gave a lot of very interesting real-world scenarios that came out of the St. Maarten experience. We've spent the last few months talking to persons from Tortola, Anguilla, St. Thomas, St. Maarten, who have, out of the tragedy of the last year's season, have come up with different priorities for how they've responded to and how the region can respond to these kinds of disasters. And I want to link what he was saying to the previous panel, because in the previous panel we were talking about the ubiquity of the cell phone, the use of technology for social and relational and even economic development type issues, things that we take for granted. One of the common unanimous threads inside of all of the conversations in the territories that were impacted by last year's storms was the fact that for most users of this now ubiquitous technology, they have no idea whatsoever what it takes to support it, what it takes to sustain it, and what it takes to return it to service when it goes down. And Sidney gave you a very sanitized view of the situation in St. Maarten, which actually mirrors the situation near the territories. And that is even in the midst of the immediacy of that post-storm disruption, where you had persons struggling for basic amenities, water, shelter, food, the internet, and this expectation that when you turn on your cell phone, you will be connected to the world was something that many people had a great difficulty understanding. Well, why aren't we connected? And you had scenarios that went from persons stealing generators from the telecom providers in some territories to persons going to the emergency data and wireless access points that were set up so that people can communicate with families and loved ones that they were safe. People going to those things to check out Facebook and download YouTube videos. That's the level of ignorance, if you will, as to the importance of communications infrastructure in the aftermath of a disaster. And of course, there was another side which end users aren't really expected to be aware of or to even track, and that was the state of readiness of our telecom providers, the operators. You had cases in Dominica where cell sites didn't have backup generators. Things that regulators, government, and end users take for granted. I assume that if you are a major provider running a big, I wouldn't almost said better network, running a big network, that there are certain things that you do to take care of the network. It's critical infrastructure. Communications is a fundamental part of life in the 21st century, and the network service providers should do things to keep their networks resilient. And that was the assumption that was made across the region, and that was the assumption that was proved to be false across the region. And so here we are, 2018, looking at the hurricane season is already upon us. Shernon gave at the start of his presentation a set of points about what is wrong and what needs to be addressed in the region. The Commission is wrapping up its work to identify a set of recommendations as to what can happen and why it needs to happen. And in both cases, the ISOC report didn't say anything new, and the Communications Commission's resilience report is not going to say anything particularly novel. I can run quickly through it. I'm not going to go into any detail. I'll just put this stuff up on slides so you can see. And then I want to open the floor to questions so that you can just go to the graphics. Next. 10-member commission made up from personnel across the region. Interesting thing about the commission was that it had no members of any of the interested parties as commissioners. So we didn't have regulators, we didn't have network operators as part of the commission. We wanted a group that was entirely objective, that could look at this issue through clean and pure lenses and come up with appropriate recommendations that we want to be actionable. Things that the public can understand, things that the regulators can understand, things that governments can understand, and ultimately things that the operators who have responsibility, primary responsibility for infrastructure, can understand. So you skipped one, just go one back. So the draft policy recommendations looked at energy, and you heard that come up in the St. Maarten presentation. When power goes, there is no network, full stop, amen, end of story. So if we're talking about communications and coordination, we assume that that has to involve communications being available. That also has to involve power being available. And so a listing of the agencies and the personnel who will be responsible for supplying that power, a priority ranking of those who need first access to things like diesel for generators and the security that goes with that, all that has to be part of any resilience and recovery plan. Ham operators. In the case of several of the territories, there was no one on the other end of the last line of defense for communications, which is the ham operator network. Persons who live outside of the mobile network and the telecommunications network, able to say, we're alive, we need this or we need that. And in the discussions since then, we realized that a huge new wave of training has to be done for ham radio operators, getting young people interested in it, training people in basic things like how to build a radio from scratch, how to set up a tower or antenna, things that you would take for engineering granted that we realize are no longer part of the foundation or fabric of the region's engineering community. Installation codes, minimum standards for towers and so on, infrastructure sharing. I'll leave the list and the presentation with you all, but you get the point. There are things that have to be done. And the other point that I want to leave with you, and as we open up for questions, is there are things that have to be done before you get hit by a hurricane, not after. And what we have found, too sad a situation across the region, is that a lot of the epiphany came in the aftermath of the storm. And as we look at a new hurricane season and as we prepare for the inevitability of future hurricane seasons, it makes sense that at a national level and at a regional level, there is much greater, much more coordinated efforts to put things in place to ensure that critical communication infrastructure and the wider infrastructure of our societies is in place. Thank you.
So we will open the floor now for a few questions. 5 minutes. Please identify yourself and then ask your question. Sidney, are you still online? Yes, okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Mohammed Charles, graduate of Spanish with Linguistics at UE Cave Hill. My question is this. Your last point was about protecting our sources of internet communications, that sort of thing, because especially right after a hurricane, natural disaster. But and it's true, we do take it for granted, but exactly what measures can the common man take to protect certain stuff like that so that when, after it passes, it's easier to communicate to loved ones overseas and say, oh, look, we're okay, we're alive, we need this, etc., etc.
You want to take it? Or Sidney, you want?
I can, but I don't know if Sidney as an operator. Let me give the short answer and Sidney could give a long answer. The common man can do little above making sure that you have backup batteries, things to keep your devices charged and so on. The infrastructure that gives you communication is the responsibility of network operators and infrastructure operators. And there are things that we have to trust the agencies like the regulator, the government, and the operators themselves to put in place. But that trust, as someone said earlier, can be verified through policy. So, Sidney?
Yes,
yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, before I answer the question, Bevil, you made a very important comment in your presentation there, and I wanted to expand that, and I think that would answer the question too as well, or at least leads towards an answer, is that we live now in a brave new world in terms of communication. Born in the Caribbean, live in the Caribbean, been through many storms. I remember, up to the last storm that I experienced, you hear the public announcements, you make sure you have water, food, batteries for radio, and that type of thing. Now, the public announcements are basically the same, but the reality is that people are more reliant on cell phones or electronic means of communication, whereby you can go to your corner store and pick up a AAA battery or a double D battery and put it in your phone and hope all will be well for the next couple of days. Because once your battery has been depleted from your cell phone, you're literally out of communication if there's no communication already to be had. So these are the things that, as a regulator and as a society, that we have to learn and advance ourselves and how to deal with it going forward. And again, in our look, our Smartness looked at it as, I say, okay, well, you know what? People, they have their phones, that won't get damaged as such, but the infrastructure has been compromised where we have emergency communications in the form of a VSAT, if no other can be done, with the help of some hotspots, because after a storm has passed and in telecommunications has been compromised in different forms, the RF environment is very quiet. There's very little going on. So a simple hotspot can take you a long way. And people have to realize very fast that this is just basically for me to send a message to my family that I'm alive, that I'm okay. You most probably will have also agencies giving out their WhatsApp numbers to the residents of the country, indicating that if there's any need, that they can contact them via WhatsApp as well. And with a basic Wi-Fi connection, that can be done. And it was done in Maarten, and it was done quite successfully, I may add, with the help of Vodafone. Another thing too, in terms of being a brave new world, we are the islands, the world, as a matter of fact, is heavily invested in up to date and new technology as respects to fixed networks. We have known until recently was copper,
Sidney,
whereby copper.
Sidney.
Yeah, sure.
We moeten afronden.
Okay, no problem. I'll finish that. Whereby copper was being electricity over copper was being generated by the telecommunications plant themselves via batteries and inverters. Now with the advent of fiber optic going out and rolling out, and we can enjoy faster internet and so forth. After a storm has passed, at the repeater sites, there's no power, or very limited power, or power needs to be restored back. So you're dead in the water where that is concerned as well. So it is a very fluent situation where we have to learn real fast how to deal with it with new technology and in a disaster environment.
Okay, thank you very much, Sidney.
Sure.
Yes, let me ask one more question and then we can. Yes, okay. Let's take all the questions and then we will finish because we are already running late. Okay, so please identify yourself and then go ahead.
All right. Lisa Evanson Strategy. I want to know what we in the Caribbean are doing to both research and legislate for resilience. For example, there's some jurisdictions where cell phones must have radio chips. That is not a mandatory requirement in this region. It could have been useful, I believe, in some cases for that to happen. So what are we doing to research and legislate for our own resilience, be it materials that we make our towers from, what we need our applications, our hardware and applications to do?
Okay, thank you very much. Are there other questions?
Right here.
Okay.
Jeff Shepard. For the last 10 years, I've been working as a sales and marketing manager of a solar company, and until I retired 3 years ago. But I haven't heard anything in the discussion today, as you were speaking, or Sidney was speaking, about the possibilities of putting solar cells in the islands. In Barbados, I know there is about over 20 schools, primary schools in this island that has 2 or 3 kilowatt systems on their roofs. And they're there for primarily hurricanes and that sort of thing. The situation in St. Maarten and Dominica and all the other places, I hear you talking about diesel generators and those sort of things, but those things are sort of outdated because solar system, we have sun all through the Caribbean, and all you need to power a cell, a ham station, or a cell or wireless station is a solar system. And you can easily put down a 2 kilowatt system. You don't have to go for a 10 or an 8 or a big kilowatt system. A 2 or 3 kilowatt system is adequately enough to keep power going. I watched last year when the hurricane passed through Puerto Rico. I saw a roof of a house that came right off. It had a solar system on it, but none of the solar panels leave the roof. The roof went, but the solar panels remain. People think that solar panels will blow off easily. They do not blow off that easily because they're very well attached. And I think that one of the suggestions I would like to put to the governments and people who have authority to put these things together is to set up solar cells across the island.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's answer. Okay, identify yourself, please, and then ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jabari Garns. I'm the information technician at the Hilton Barbados Resort. My question to you, with regards to the presentation you made, I saw there was a lot of emphasis on hurricanes, but there are also other natural disasters such as earthquakes in the Caribbean, volcanic activity. The reason I'm bringing this up is because in the Caribbean, some of us who work in the industry would know when there is seismic activity in the region, we get intermittent problems with connectivity around the region and to the wider world. So, and that's just with minor instances. So if we have a major, let's say, God forbid, earthquake or volcanic activity that damages, let's say, offshore cables or causes major underground damage to infrastructure, do the measures that you put in, that you spoke about, which were more geared towards hurricanes, are those also geared towards seismic and volcanic activity? And if not, what do you guys recommend we do to mitigate that? Because it is an issue in the Caribbean.
Okay, so let me start first answering your last question, and then I'll begin. Okay, go ahead, please. I was just looking that side. Sorry about that.
No problem. Stephen Williams, ICT Professional Association. Has there been any movement at maybe CDMA level or even at the CARICOM level for check-in app? I think hearing what Bevil you were talking about in relation to the amount of people just utilizing the bandwidth for inappropriate reasons, I think one of the major issues you want connectivity for is to check in and also say what you may need in an emergency way. If you're diabetic, if you need medicine, that sort of stuff. I think the time may come, maybe here, where we have a check-in app to say, I'm alive, count 4 in terms of family, and then this is my emergency need at this point in time.
Okay, we do also have one online question.
We have one question from the remote participant. Question for Sidney. What role do you see the internet exchange point in your disaster management plan in I think it means what role do you see internet exchange points playing in your disaster management planning in St. Martin?
Okay, so let me first start answering my good friend here over. I did mention natural disasters. Of course, I mean, we did focus a bit on hurricane because that was the issue last year. But if you did look a bit at my presentation, the focus was more on natural disasters. So that's an overarching definition. And we are focusing, let's say, on, the internet infrastructure / telecommunication infrastructure. Because as I did mention, without telecommunication infrastructure, you don't have internet infrastructure neither. So that is why, that's the focus. So I would like to now, we had also a question on research and legislation. So, good friend over there. So, Bevil, you would like to take that one?
Sure, and it's a simple and easy answer, and it relates to the answer to your question. The work that the Commission is doing is certainly looking at anything that has the potential to disrupt communications infrastructure, whether it's a great hurricane. In the case of Tortola, several weeks before the hurricane, there was a tropical depression that flooded out Road Town and disrupted communication. So we know that we are increasingly vulnerable to these kinds of natural disasters. And one of the big challenges with the region that this whole climate change issue is bringing to light is the gap between proclamation and action, the gap between intention and implementation. And there is a new urgency, and a lot of the groups that are working in this space are taking advantage of the fact that resilience is a new hot topic, right? And we can't wish for another hurricane to keep it as a hot topic, nor can we wish for an earthquake or something like that. But there is a window right now for a lot of the policy considerations and a lot of the actual change in practice and in investment to make some of these things a reality. At the CARICOM level, at the OECS level, there are active plans toward a coordinated approach to monitoring and protecting the telecommunications space. And a lot of it is dusting off documents that have existed for some time now. So we're hoping that we, as a region, can really push now toward some specific action in some specific areas. Some of the things that Sidney raised are as simple as sharing tower spectrum in the event where one jurisdiction goes down and you actually have access either to AM, FM, or telecommunication spectrum from another jurisdiction, you should be able to communicate without roaming charges for the period of the emergency. Simple things like those, which have to be codified in policy, are now part of the ongoing regional dialogue. And that's something that we have to be mindful of. And for the gentleman who asked about solar, again, solar has come up as one of the most critical and fundamental ways to restore power in the short term that the region is capable of. Solar has been around for a while. We have been saying solar is the answer to many things. We have sun, just like we have sand. And now there is a whole new renewed effort toward putting solar at the top of the table again. Ditto for internet exchange points.
Yes, thank you. Sidney, very short, but maybe you can elaborate a bit on what role did the IXP play in St. Maarten, but very brief, basically, please. You're unmuted. Okay, go ahead.
In terms of the exchange, yes, the exchange can play a very important role. Again, once it has not been compromised in any form or fashion, again, if the exterior infrastructure has been compromised, and I would put the inner, so the head end is not compromised, that we can roll out a very simple Wi-Fi network coming out of the exchange and be able to have the residents connect via that way. And again, I say, as long as the internet exchange and the sea cable has not been compromised, because we were, unfortunately, 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago with Hurricane Gonzalo, our sea cable was compromised in Puerto Rico, where it shifted across a reef and it was cut, and whereby the reparation of it was very costly and timely. So we're tethered to something at some point in time. So it is based on this actual situation at the moment. How do we go forward? But it does and can play a very important role after a disaster has occurred.
Okay, thank you very much. And we had one last question with respect to bandwidth and, let's say, what role does it play, especially when it comes to emergency? Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that? No? So with that, I would like to thank you then. And I think we have a very important role to play. Remember, we are talking about internet, we are talking about telecommunications, but we have also a thing called nature that is fighting something sometimes against us. So we need to fight, we cannot fight against nature, but at least we can mitigate, let's say, the result of what is happening. So with that, I would like to thank you, and let's give panelists a round of applause.